Hi everyone! So this is the first mini lesson about the origins of Arthur, or what the fuck is a chronicle? This lesson follows chapter 1 of the romance of Arthur, Arthur in the Latin Chronicles. If you're feeling lost, make sure to have your texts with you as you watch this video. Okay, so way back in 547, a monk named Gildas wrote a polemical treatise in Latin that told about the Roman conquest of Britain. This particular conquest started around the year 43 and ended in 410. Gildas wrote about a tyrannical leader who scholars generally associate with the British chieftain Vortigern, who was, by all accounts, an actual 5th century Saxon warlord. Fun fact real quick, Vortigern is actually a title that means great chief or supreme lord. It wasn't this guy's actual name, but his given name is lost. In addition to Vortigern, Gildas also tells us about Celtic and Welsh people displaced by him and his Saxon army. These folks rallied under a leader called Ambrosius Aurelianus and managed to beat Vortigern. Hooray! So you might be wondering what any of this has to do with Arthurian literature, with chronicles, or anything at all, really. Hang tight, we're on our way. So things to remember so far. There were big problems with the Roman invasion. There were evil Saxon warlords and displaced people rallying under a hero, who's currently called Ambrosius. Okay, so next up, there was a guy called Bede, who basically repeats Gildas's work in his 731 Ecclesiastical History of the English Nation. Again in this story, Vortigern is bad, Ambrosius is good. So this text is actually getting closer to what we might call a chronicle. But the first Latin chronicle to actually mention the name Arthur is the History of the Britons, which was probably compiled by a guy named Nennius around the year 800. So, very important, Arthur as we know him shows up around the year 800. So I'm gonna move away from the content really quick to tell you a little bit about what a chronicle actually is. So chronicles are the ways that people used to record history. And when I say people, I mean the men who occupied power positions. The scholar Norman Kurskin defines the people who wrote chronicles as intellectuals of the time enjoying a close relationship to the princely court and or to the higher clergy. So these kinds of documents are always political and have everything to do with empire and expansion. Never think that a chronicle history is an unbiased version of actual facts. Scholar Patrick Geary classifies chronicles as texts that organize time by generations, reigns, or other large units of time, and can be elaborated in highly developed narratives. Hans Werner Goetz points to the essential criteria of history as defined by Isidore of Seville, which was repeated throughout the Middle Ages. It translates from the Latin roughly as, history is the narration of facts by which we learn what happened in the past. So this definition sets up the genre of the chronicle as the textual reproduction of truth. That is, according to medieval chroniclers, what we read in their chronicles are facts, things that actually and definitely happened. However, this pure presentation of fact gets complicated when we consider other definitions, ones told by people like Berthold of Zweifalten or John of Salisbury. They think that chronicle history is the idea of recording history that is worth retelling and knowing. So there's a small difference there, right? Berthold and John both think about the impulse to record the right kinds of history, which serves as the basis for the tradition of the National Chronicle, a trend that developed largely after the Norman conquest in 1066. So with Arthurian literature, we're really thinking of the subgenre of the National Chronicle. What we really need to keep in mind is how chronicles are political documents that are often recording a version of the truth that men in power positions want to be recorded. So that leaves out a lot of people, and it skews the kind of history that gets retold. One way that we can see that is through the development of the Arthurian mythology in historical chronicles. Okay, so Nennius is over there writing a history of the English nation. And there's a new hero in town, Arthur. And boy, Arthur is something. Nennius claims that he single-handedly killed 960 men at his 12th battle, the Battle of Medon. Arthur also has a dog. The dog is important because it shows us that Arthurian stories were already becoming popular mythologies by Nennius's time. So the dog, named Cabal, shows up in chapter 1 on pages 3 to 4. While Arthur and his men are out hunting boar, Cabal stepped on a stone, which was instantly imprinted with his paw. And later, for reason unbeknownst to anyone, Arthur collected a little rock pile under that stone and called it Cairn Cabal. The story goes that whenever men would try to carry the stone away, it would always reappear back on its pile by the next day. Why did this happen? I don't know, but what it's demonstrating is that people were already telling these kinds of stories about Arthur and his larger-than-life persona. Okay, also remember to keep the boar hunting in your back pocket for when we come to texts like Coleridge and Olwen later on in the week. Okay, so far we've talked about a couple of historical chronicles that happened pre-Norman conquest, right? We're going to move now to William of Malmesbury, who wrote his chronicle, The Deeds of the English Kings, around 1125. So we're 100-ish years after the Norman conquest, right? Which is when the National Chronicle starts to be a thing. You can see even by the title, The Deeds of the English Kings, we are talking about purely English history. So in William of Malmesbury's text, Arthur is portrayed as a messianic figure. Again, he's reported as killing 900 men all by himself. But William of Malmesbury also adds in another character, who, while he might not be familiar now, will become so in due course. A guy called Walwyn. We know him now as Gawain. According to William, Walwyn's tomb was 14 feet long, making him the world's tallest man. So more mythology happening, right? These men are literally larger than life. Okay, so all this history serves as the basis for Arthurian legend, but also for British history. So next up, remember those Welsh folks I mentioned at the beginning of this lesson? Arthur exists in their texts too.